The sound of hammering woke Eliza Crane at dawn. She climbed out of bed and looked out the window to see Rowan Thorne nailing boards across the glass. One window already covered, two more to go. He worked methodically, precisely, like a man who had been planning this for days. Eliza stood there in her nightgown, watching him seal her inside. And the strangest part was that she was not afraid. She should have been terrified, should have been screaming. But she just stood there with her hand on the cold glass and thought about what had led to this moment. Stories like this one remind you that sometimes the darkest seeming moments hold the most light. That context changes everything. If you want stories that make you reconsider what you think you know, subscribe so you never miss one. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Because what really happened the morning Rowan Thorne boarded up those windows became the story that people in Silver Peak, Montana told for the next 50 years, and not for the reason you think. Eliza Crane had been hired to cook for Rowan Thorne from November through March of 1886. The arrangement was simple. She would stay in his cabin on the mountain, cook 3 meals a day for him and his 2 ranch hands, keep the house clean, and in return, she would receive room and board and $40, enough to see her through the next year. She needed the money desperately. Her father had died in August, leaving debts Eliza had spent 3 months paying off. By October, she had nothing left. No family, no prospects, no place to live. When Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house told her about Rowan Thorne looking for a winter cook, Eliza took it without hesitation. Even though people said Rowan was strange, even though his cabin was 15 miles from town and she would be snowed in for months, even though Mrs. Henderson said in a low voice,
"Are you sure, dear? That man has been alone too long."
Eliza was sure. Desperation makes you sure about things you might otherwise question. Rowan Thorne met her at the base of the mountain with a wagon and 2 horses. He was a big man, tall and broad through the shoulders, with dark hair and darker eyes, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He was 42 years old, and had been living alone on the mountain for 8 years since his wife died in childbirth along with the baby. "You are Eliza Crane," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir. You understand the terms? November through March. Cooking and cleaning. You stay in the cabin, no leaving until spring." "I understand. The snow gets deep, sometimes 8 feet. The pass closes completely by December. Once you are up there until thaw." "I understand," Eliza said again. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then he gestured to the wagon. "Get in." The ride up the mountain took 4 hours. Rowan did not speak. Eliza watched the trail get narrower and the trees get thicker and the sky disappear behind clouds that promised snow. By the time they reached the cabin, the first flakes were falling. The cabin was bigger than she expected. 2 stories, solid construction, with a wide porch and windows that faced the valley below. Inside it was sparse, but clean. A large kitchen, a sitting room with a stone fireplace, 3 bedrooms upstairs. Rowan showed her to the smallest room. "This is yours. The 2 ranch hands, Dutch and Samuel, sleep in the other rooms. I sleep downstairs in the room off the kitchen." He set her bag on the bed. "Meals are at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening. We do not talk much during meals. We work. You cook. That is the arrangement." "Yes, sir." "And one more thing." Rowan stood in the doorway. "You do not go outside without telling me first. The mountain is dangerous in winter. People get lost. People die. I need to know where you are." "I understand." He nodded and left. Eliza sat on the bed and looked around the small room, and tried not to think about what she had agreed to. 5 months on a mountain with 3 men and no way to leave. It should have terrified her, but she had been terrified for 3 months already. This felt almost like relief. The first few weeks were exactly what Rowan had described. Eliza cooked. The men worked. They ate in silence. Dutch and Samuel were friendly enough in a distant way, nodded their thanks after meals, complimented the food sometimes, stayed out of her way. Rowan barely spoke. He came in from outside covered in snow, ate whatever she put in front of him, and disappeared again. But Eliza noticed things. She noticed that Rowan always came to meals exactly on time. Not early, not late. Exactly at 6 in the morning, and noon, and 6 in the evening, like he had been waiting outside counting the minutes until the clock said it was acceptable to come in. She noticed that he ate slowly and carefully, like each bite mattered, like he was savoring something he had been missing for a very long time. She noticed that he never took seconds, even when she offered, never asked for anything, ate exactly what was on his plate and nothing more, like he was afraid of wanting too much. She noticed that he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, more like he was trying to figure out if she was real, like he was afraid she might disappear if he looked away too long. And she noticed that the cabin was full of ghosts. A woman's shawl hanging on a hook by the door, faded from sun but still there. A child's wooden toy on the mantel, a small carved horse with one ear broken off. Books in the sitting room, with a woman's name, Catherine Thorne, written inside the cover in careful script. A rocking chair in the corner that no one ever sat in. Rowan had not cleared away his wife's things. He had just stopped looking at them, stopped seeing them, made them part of the walls. Eliza wanted to ask about Catherine, but did not know how, did not know if it was her place. So she just cooked and cleaned and moved quietly through the cabin, like she was afraid of waking something that had been sleeping for a long time. In December, the snow came in earnest. 3 feet fell in one night, then another 2 feet the following week. The cabin became an island in a sea of white. Dutch and Samuel spent their days clearing paths to the barn and the woodshed and checking on the animals. Rowan spent his days doing whatever it was he did. Eliza was never quite sure. He disappeared into the woods most mornings and came back at dusk with firewood or game or nothing at all. One evening, Eliza was cooking stew when Rowan came in earlier than usual. He stood by the fire, warming his hands and watching her work. She could feel his eyes on her back. "You are a good cook," he said finally. Eliza turned around. "Thank you. Better than I expected." "What did you expect?" "I do not know. Something less." He looked at the pot on the stove. "My wife could not cook. She tried, but she never got the hang of it. Everything came out burned or raw or both somehow." He smiled a little, just a little. "I told her it did not matter. I ate it anyway." It was the first time Eliza had heard him mention his wife. "What was her name?" "Catherine." He said it like the word hurt. "She was 23 when she died. Too young. I am sorry. Everyone is sorry." His voice was flat. "Sorry does not bring her back. Sorry does not make the cabin less empty. Sorry is just a word people say when they do not know what else to say." Eliza did not say she was sorry again. She just went back to stirring the stew and let the silence sit between them. After that, Rowan started talking more. Not a lot, but more than before. He told her about the mountain, about the lynx he saw one morning stalking through the snow, about the elk herd that came through every January, about the wolves that howled at night and sounded closer than they were. He told her about the winter 8 years ago when he and Catherine got snowed in for 6 weeks and ran out of food and had to survive on dried meat and melted snow. About how Catherine had made it into a game, pretending they were explorers on an adventure, rationing their supplies like they were crossing the Arctic. About how she had laughed when the last of the flour ran out and said they would just have to eat their boots like the Donner Party, but hopefully with better results. She could find light in anything, Rowan said one evening while they sat by the fire. Dutch and Samuel had gone to bed, and it was just the two of them.
Even when I was scared or angry or convinced we were going to die, she would find something to laugh about, something to be grateful for. "She sounds wonderful," Eliza said quietly. She was. Rowan stared at the fire. And then she was gone. She went into labor in the middle of a blizzard. The midwife could not get up the mountain. I delivered the baby myself, a boy. He was perfect. But Catherine was bleeding and I did not know how to stop it. I held her hand and she told me she loved me, and then she was just gone. The baby died 3 hours later. I buried them both when the ground thawed. Eliza's throat was tight. "I am so sorry." Everyone says that, but sorry does not change anything. Sorry does not bring them back. Sorry is just... He stopped, shook his head. "I do not mean to be cruel. I know people mean well. But after 8 years of sorry, I am tired of hearing it." "Then I will not say it again." Eliza looked at him across the fire. "But I will say this. You survived something that would have killed most people. Not the blizzard, the grief. And you are still here. That takes strength." Rowan looked at her. "I am not strong. I am just too stubborn to die." "Maybe stubbornness is another kind of strength." He almost smiled. Almost. "Maybe." Eliza listened.
She did not offer advice, did not try to fix anything, just listened. And slowly, night by night, Rowan began to seem less like a ghost himself. He started sitting with her by the fire after dinner instead of disappearing to his room. Started asking her questions about her life before the mountain. Started existing in the present instead of living in the past. In January, Eliza got sick. It started as a cough on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday it was a fever. By Thursday she could not get out of bed. Her whole body ached. Her head throbbed. The room spun every time she opened her eyes. She tried to get up and cook breakfast that first morning. Made it halfway down the stairs before her legs gave out. Rowan found her sitting on the steps, shaking, too weak to go up or down. He did not say anything, just picked her up and carried her back to bed. His arms were strong and steady, and Eliza was too sick to be embarrassed about it. "You need to rest," he said, setting her down. "I am supposed to cook." "Dutch can cook." "Dutch cannot cook. I have seen what he makes." Her voice was hoarse, raw. "It is inedible." "Then we will eat inedible food for a few days." Rowan pulled the blanket up to her chin. "You are no good to anyone dead." Eliza wanted to argue, but she did not have the strength. She just closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. She woke once and found Rowan sitting by her bed with a cloth in his hand. He dipped it in a basin of cold water and pressed it to her forehead. The cold felt good against her burning skin. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Keeping you alive." His voice was quiet, steady. "Go back to sleep." She did. When she woke again, it was dark. Rowan was still there, sitting in the chair by the window, watching her. "How long have you been there?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "You should sleep." "I will sleep when you are better." He stood up and came to the bed, felt her forehead with the back of his hand. "Fever is down. That is good." "You do not have to stay with me." "Yes, I do." He sat back down in the chair. "When Catherine was sick, I left her alone. Went to check the animals. Came back and she was worse. I will not make that mistake again." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "I am not Catherine." "I know." Rowan looked at her. "But I cannot lose another person I—" He stopped, did not finish the sentence, just looked away. Eliza wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to make him finish that sentence, but she was too tired. She just closed her eyes and fell back asleep, with the sound of his breathing in the dark. On the third day, the fever broke. Eliza sat up and found soup beside the bed. It was terrible soup, watery and undersalted, with chunks of vegetables that were either raw or mush. But it was warm, and someone had made it for her. She drank it all. When she came downstairs that evening, Rowan was sitting by the fire. He looked up when she entered. "You should still be in bed." "I am fine. I need to cook." "I told Dutch to make something." "I know. I smelled it." Eliza sat down across from him. "Thank you for taking care of me." "You would have done the same." "Would I have?" Rowan looked at her. "Yes. You are the kind of person who takes care of people. I can tell." "How can you tell?" "Because you have been taking care of me since you got here, and you do not even know it." He looked back at the fire. "This cabin has been dead for 8 years, and then you came and it was not dead anymore. I did not realize how much I needed that until I had it." Eliza's throat was tight. "I am only here until spring." "I know." His voice was quiet. "That is the problem." In February, the snow started to melt. Not much, just enough that you could see it happening. The days got longer, the sun got warmer, and Eliza started to dread spring. She did not want to leave. She had not wanted to admit it to herself, but it was true. She did not want to go back to town and find work and live in some boarding house room and pretend that these 5 months had not changed her. Because they had changed her. She had come to the mountain desperate and empty, and now she was full. Full of mountain air and good work, and the quiet company of a man who was starting to remember how to be alive. But the arrangement was until spring, and spring was coming. One morning in early March, Eliza woke to the sound of hammering. She climbed out of bed and went to the window and saw Rowan nailing boards across the glass. Her window. He was covering her window. She should have been terrified, should have run downstairs screaming. But she just stood there watching him work, and what she felt was not fear. It was curiosity. When he finished her window, he moved to the next one, then the next. By noon, every window in the cabin was boarded up. The house was dark. Dutch and Samuel stood in the yard looking confused. Eliza went downstairs. Rowan was in the kitchen, nailing boards across the last window. She stood in the doorway and watched him finish. "What are you doing?" she asked. Rowan set down the hammer, turned to face her. "Keeping you safe." "From what?" "From leaving." His voice was steady, calm. "The pass opens in 2 weeks. When it opens, you will leave. Because that was the arrangement. You will go back to town, and I will stay here, and everything will go back to the way it was. And I cannot—" He stopped, swallowed, started again. "I cannot let that happen." Eliza should have been afraid. This man had just boarded up every window, had trapped her inside. But she looked at his face and saw not madness but desperation, not cruelty but fear. "So you boarded up the windows," she said slowly. "Yes." "To keep me here?" "Yes." "Against my will?" Rowan's face went pale. No, not against your will. He stopped, looked at the boards covering the window, looked back at her. "I did this wrong." "Yes, you did." "I panicked." He ran his hand through his hair. "The pass is opening and you are leaving, and I realized I am in love with you, and I do not know how to ask you to stay. I do not know how to ask anyone for anything. So I thought if I just—" He gestured helplessly at the windows. "If I made it so you could not leave, then maybe—" He stopped again, shook his head. "I am not explaining this right." "No, you are not." Eliza crossed her arms. "You boarded up the windows because you love me?" "Yes." "And you think that is how you convince someone to stay?" "I told you I did this wrong." Rowan sat down heavily in a chair, put his head in his hands. "I do not know how to be a person anymore. I have been alone too long. I see you, and I feel alive, and I do not know what to do with that. So I did something stupid." Eliza walked over to him, stood in front of him until he looked up. "You should have asked me." "Asked you what?" "To stay. You should have asked me to stay instead of boarding up the windows like a madman." Rowan stared at her. "Would you have said yes?" "I do not know. You did not give me a chance to answer. I am asking now." His voice was rough, raw. "Will you stay? Not because I boarded up the windows, not because you are trapped, but because you want to. Because you feel what I feel. Because this cabin is better with you in it, and I am better with you in it, and I do not want to go back to being half dead." Eliza looked at him, at this big, broken man who had tried to keep her with lumber and nails because he did not know how to keep her with words. "Tear down the boards." "What?" "Tear down the boards, all of them, right now." Rowan stood up. "And then?" "And then ask me again." It took him 2 hours to tear down every board. Dutch and Samuel helped, looking bewildered. When the last board came down and light flooded back into the cabin, Rowan came to Eliza. He was covered in sawdust and breathing hard. "Will you stay?" he asked. "Why should I?" "Because I love you. Because you are the only person in 8 years who has made me want to be alive instead of just surviving. Because I know I am broken, but I think maybe you are broken too, and maybe we could be less broken together." "I am not broken," Eliza said.
"Then maybe you could teach me how not to be broken anymore."
Eliza looked at the windows, at the light streaming through, at the cabin that had been her prison and her salvation, at the man who had tried to trap her because he did not know how to ask her to stay. "I will stay," she said. "But not because you boarded up the windows. Because you tore them down." Rowan pulled her into his arms and held her like he was afraid she would disappear. "I will never board them up again." "Good. Because if you do, I will tear them down myself and leave anyway." He laughed, actually laughed. "I believe you." They were married in April in the small church in Silver Peak. Half the town came because everyone had heard the story, how Rowan Thorne had boarded up his windows to keep the cook from leaving. The story had spread fast and gotten wilder with each telling. Some said he had held her hostage for weeks. Some said she had escaped by climbing out through the roof. Some said it was the most romantic thing they had ever heard. At the wedding, the preacher asked if anyone objected. Dutch stood up. I object to the version of this story everyone keeps telling, he said. Rowan boarded up those windows at dawn. By noon they were torn down. Eliza was never trapped. She could have left any time she wanted. He just did not know how to ask her to stay, so he did something stupid. Then he fixed it. That is the real story. The preacher looked at Rowan. Is that true? Yes, sir. And you tore the boards down yourself? Every single one. The preacher looked at Eliza. And you stayed anyway? I did. Well then. The preacher smiled. That is a better story than the other one. Anyone else object? No one did. The preacher pronounced them married, and Rowan kissed his wife in front of everyone, and someone in the back shouted, "Do not board up any more windows!" And everyone laughed. They lived in that cabin for the next 35 years. Rowan never boarded up another window. In fact, he added 3 more, bigger ones that let in more light. They had 2 children, both born in that cabin on the mountain. Dutch and Samuel stayed on and helped run the property. The cabin became a home full of light and life and laughter. People in Silver Peak talked about Rowan and Eliza Thorne for 50 years. They talked about the morning he boarded up the windows to keep her from leaving. But they also talked about how he tore them down when she asked, how he learned that love is not about trapping someone, but about giving them the freedom to choose you anyway. And they talked about what Eliza said when someone asked her if she was angry about the windows. I was not angry. I was curious. Because a man who boards up windows out of love is a man who does not know how to use his words. And once I taught him to use his words, he never needed the boards again. That is not imprisonment. That is learning. And I would rather teach a man to speak than leave a man who is too afraid to ask. Eliza Thorne died in 1921 at the age of 68. Rowan died 3 weeks later. They were buried on the hill behind the cabin, with windows that let in the light. On Eliza's headstone, Rowan had carved the words she said to him that morning. Tear down the boards, and then ask me again. Not because I am trapped, but because I can choose, and I choose you.